Time to pull up a chair. We've got another great story for you today in the rLounge. It's often said that blending families is like trying to mix oil and water. No matter how hard you stir, they just don't seem to combine. Today in the rLounge, does tough love really build character? Let's dive in. Stepson humiliated my daughter. I stopped funding his college tuition and kicked him out of the house. I'm stuck in a weird scenario. Posting it here to maybe get some advice or perspective. My daughter and my stepson just cannot stand each other, and most of the time my wife and I are torn in between. Our marriage definitely is taking a hit amidst this fight. I, 49 male, have been married to my second wife, Kyra, 46 female, for 4 years now. She has a 20-year-old son, Jill, from her previous marriage, and I have a 15-year-old daughter, Ellie, from my first. My first wife and Ellie's mother passed away in an accident when Ellie was just 7. Since then, I've been a single parent, taking care of her. Then, a few years later, I met Kyra. She had been divorced for a while. We instantly clicked and started going out often. We thought we could fill each other's loneliness, but no one warned me how difficult it could be to bring two very different children, together under one roof. Yes, we knew it would be tough, but didn't imagine it would be this ugly. When we first got introduced to each other's children, it was pleasant from Ellie's side. She was happy to have Kyra in our life. She welcomed Kyra with open arms. Girls need women in their lives, especially in preteens. Kyra also reciprocated the love to Ellie. However, the same wasn't true for Jill. I'm not comparing them because my daughter was still preteens at the time and was very open to having another woman in her life. But Jill was in the peak of teenage years, and like every teen, he didn't give an F of what was happening in his mom's life. He was there just for the sake of it. Kyra blamed Jill's father for his behavior, but she assured me he was a nice lad and would come along eventually. We got married and they moved in with us. Jill had no objection to it. They were living in a cramped apartment, and now he got his own room in my 4-bedroom spacious house. I won't say Ellie was thrilled to have an elder brother, but she was okay, and maybe they would have bonded well if the effort were from both ends. At the start, they seemed indifferent to each other, which was a relief. Indifference, I figured, was easier to manage than open hostility. But gradually, I noticed Jill getting wicked towards Ellie. He would pass passive-aggressive comments and subtle jabs about her dressing sense. Ellie would retaliate, but she couldn't fight Jill. Most often than not, she would just take it, her face falling a little more with each passing day. At first, Kyra and I chalked it up to sibling rivalry, but when we realized Ellie couldn't fight him, we would intervene, but that made Jill salty about us. After all, they were teenagers. I thought maybe Jill was having trouble adjusting to a new family, though he'd been 16 when I married his mother. I also assumed Ellie might be quiet and withdrawn around him because he wasn't the kind of elder brother she was expecting. Maybe all of this was just an emotional adjustment for both of them. However, as Ellie entered her teenage years, she stopped taking Jill's BS and would fight back. That led to them quarreling like cats and dogs. Open hostility is what we dreaded. They would just fight over every little thing. Kyra and I tried to neutralize the situation, but it's exhausting to be caught up between those two kids. I thought it was just a matter of time before Jill would move out for college and things would get better. To my disappointment, Jill chose a college that was at arm's length from our house. Hence, didn't take up a hostel. I suggested that after college he has the rest of the evenings and weekends by himself, so better he takes up a part-time job. But Jill was too lazy to work. He was busy doing nothing, and so the hostility continued between them. The water level crossed a year back when Jill made an evil comment on Ellie's friend who visited our house. She felt humiliated. Ellie insisted Jill apologize, but he didn't. Instead, he fat-shamed Ellie, which led to a major blowout between them. Kyra was home and she tried to mediate and make Jill apologize, but that wicked lad stormed out of the house. Kyra apologized to both Ellie and her friend. However, that wasn't enough for either of them. When I came home, Kyra told me what had happened and suggested we take him for therapy or have a family session. Jill refused therapy, saying he ain't nuts. Kyra grounded him and stopped his pocket money. So he was rather forced to join us, and no therapy can help you unless you want to help yourself. The family counseling polished the bond between Kyra and Ellie because my daughter was getting distant from Kyra because of her son. Things like this kept happening over the years. Kyra and I continued to bridge the distance between our children, but all our efforts were in vain. We figured that this is how it's going to be until one of them moves out. Hence, I was looking forward to Jill moving out for college, but sadly he didn't. I'm not the kind of man who would force my stepson to work as soon as he turns 18. Now, we're hoping he completes his college, gets a job, and moves out. But last week, Jill crossed a line that made me question my decision to bring him into my daughter's life. So both Jill and Ellie go to the same tennis school. That's how Kyra and I met. During their match, Jill is ahead of Ellie, but both are very good in their league. Of late, Jill made Ellie's life hell at the tennis academy. He has been spreading stupid rumors about her. Some were harmless, but the last one crossed the line. Ellie came back from her practice, crying, and locked herself in her room. She refused to talk to any of us. She even missed her school, which is so rare of her. When we asked Jill about it, since he was also present at the practice, he acted smug. Too smug. I didn't like it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I left for work thinking to give her the time and space to cope with her stuff. When I came back in the evening, I checked her through the window. Ellie was still in her room, scribbling something on her notepad. She refused to have her dinner or talk to any of us. Kyra and I were very concerned about her, but gave her the space. During the dinner, Kyra asked Jill if he knew anything about Ellie's situation, since she was behaving like this after coming from her tennis class. He outrightly denied it. Then I found him smirking across the table, and that's when I knew he had something to do with whatever was bothering her. I asked Jill with a stern voice, "What's going on? You know something about it, don't you? You better have nothing to do with it." "Oh, it's nothing. Just some harmless fun." His tone was dripping with arrogance as he said this. It made my blood boil. He was trying to paint a picture that Ellie was just overreacting. Kyra quickly jumped in and asked what kind of fun. Jill shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Just some gossip, no big deal." Kyra almost pounded on him, asking him the details. He acted defensively and flustered. "What's wrong with you? Why do you guys always overreact? I don't know why she's acting up so much. How about asking this your snowflake baby?" I intervened, asking him to mind his language and tone. He stood up from the table midway and stormed out of the house. I left the dinner table and knocked on Ellie's door. She probably heard everything, and that's the reason she opened it. She was sulking on the couch. I said, "I know it has something to do with Jill, but please tell me what exactly happened." She looked like she wanted to disappear. Her face flushed with embarrassment, and she started sobbing. Kiara held her and asked her what's the matter. Ellie broke down, and after a meltdown, she narrated. "Jill had spread a rumor at tennis school that I have a crush on my coach, and that I was trying to flirt with him to get more playtime. The coach is very tall, like 6'4", and I'm like a foot smaller than him. People started joking about it and made me embarrassed about flirting with older and so tall of a man. I don't flirt with him, I just don't talk back like the other girls." Ellie was a shy, quiet girl who worked hard at everything she did. She had never been one for drama, and Jill had dragged her into it, publicly humiliating her. The air in the room went cold. I felt so sorry for her and wanted to wrap her in my arms and protect her from the cruel world. Amidst this, we didn't realize Jill was eavesdropping all this while. We were still trying to process what had happened and how to deal with it. Jill appeared with a cruel laugh. Kyra stood up and snapped at him. "That's not funny. Why would you do that?" Jill was still laughing, smirking, saying, "It's just a joke. Everyone's talking about it now. It's so hilarious." I was an inch closer to thrashing him black and blue. I screamed at him, "Get the F out of here. You crossed the line. You'll deal with the consequences." He tried to say something, but I yelled at him to get out. Then I requested Kyra to leave us alone. She obliged. I hugged Ellie and apologized for everything she had to go through because of my decision to bring that jerk into our lives. She understood that it was no one's fault but his. I really felt guilty about putting her through this. I'm so blessed to have such a loving daughter. I mean, how many teenagers do you see who don't blame their parents for their stepbrothers and sisters' mistakes? I made her eat and promised to make everything right for her. I went back to my room and confronted Kyra about the situation. She was also concerned about Ellie's well-being. We decided to have a serious talk with Jill. This wasn't just a minor sibling squabble anymore. It was bullying, and I wasn't going to allow it. The next day, Kyra sat him down and said, "What you did to Ellie was cruel. It's not funny. You need to apologize and tell everyone that it was a rumor that you've spread for fun. Also ensure that doesn't get repeated." He looked at me like I was being ridiculous and forcing his mom to school him. He yelled, "I'm not apologizing for a joke. If she can't take it, that's her problem. I'm not clearing off anything." I felt a knot of frustration twist in my stomach. This wasn't just teenage stubbornness. This was wickedness. I had been supporting him financially since I married his mother, paying for his college, his tennis lessons, everything. I had treated him as my son, but here he was refusing to acknowledge that he'd hurt someone so badly. I made it clear that if he doesn't apologize, there will be consequences. He snorted, clearly not taking me seriously. "Like what? You gonna ground me?" I said, "I'll stop paying for your college tuition." That got his attention. His smirk faded and he said, "You can't do that. Mom wouldn't let you." Kyra was also shocked at my statement. She didn't see this coming, but she played along and said, "Your prank has gone too far. You need to make it right if you don't want to deal with the consequences." but Jill refused. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Kyra thought I was just threatening him, but I was not. After he left, she asked me, "You weren't serious about cutting him off, were you?" I said yes. I'm going to cut off his college tuition if he doesn't back down. She got worried about his future and said it was an extreme punishment and we couldn't risk his future. I said then he should take accountability and apologize. She got quiet. She knows Jill is too proud to make things right. I didn't tell her this, but honestly, I feel paying for his college is a waste of money. I mean, he isn't serious about his studies at all. He went to college only to waste his time so that no one asked him to work. He took 4 years to finish high school and 2 years to finish his first year of college. What else do I say? I really want to teach him a lesson, but sadly, I have limited options like cutting him off his tuition or maybe asking for rent. But I'm worried that this might affect my marriage. Any better solution, long term, to deal with this evil guy? Blending families can be incredibly challenging. Jill's behavior is definitely crossing the line from typical sibling rivalry into bullying. Consider setting clear boundaries and consequences if he refuses to apologize. You could also explore family counseling again, as it seems to have helped improve the bond between Kyra and Ellie in the past. As for your marriage, finding common ground on how to handle the situation will be important for both your relationship and for the kids. Update 1. So, I remained true to my word. I stopped paying Jill's college tuition. Jill continued his ill behavior and refused to acknowledge the humiliation he caused Ellie. The embarrassment was so intense for her that she even quit tennis. I told Kyra that Jill's behavior has to be scrutinized before it's too late, but there was nothing she could do. That boy was out of hand. He thought it was a hollow threat, and eventually I would forget it, but I didn't. Soon it was time for his semester fee, which I defaulted. I stood on my grounds. I got several reminder calls and emails from his college, but I ignored it. Then just a day before the deadline, he came to me and said, "Dude, when are you planning to pay the tuition? The accounts guy's chasing my butt." Yes, this was his exact language. I replied, "Don't you dare talk to me with this slang, else I'll shove your stupid accent into your lazy butt, and I'm not going to pay you for your tuition any further unless you take the responsibility of your action and apologize." I thought that losing something as significant as his education might wake him up, but gosh no. He gave me an annoyed look and said, "You think this would make me apologize, huh?" And then he walked out of the house. The next I know, he dropped out of college. Kyra was upset with the entire situation. She said she should have stepped in at the right time and paid for his tuition. Until the last day, she thought I would pay it, but when she realized I wasn't losing my guard, she offered to pitch in. She didn't have that much money in hand. She had to liquidate her savings. She went to the college authorities to ask for an extension, but by then, her entitled son had already met his academic advisor and submitted his withdrawal request. Jill refused to take her help, accusing her of not standing by him. He guilt-tripped her that she favored us over him. Despite his massive ego, he was still lounging at my house and at my expense. Kyra doesn't earn much. They were barely able to make ends meet before meeting me, but she worked 2 jobs to raise him. After we got married, I asked her to take it easy and quit one or both if she wanted. She continued with one. Kyra was devastated by Jill's decision. She tried reasoning with him, pleading with him to apologize to Ellie and go back to school next term. But Jill refused, doubling down on his defiance. After he dropped out, he became worse. He spent his days lounging around the house, playing video games, or hanging out with friends, doing anything but looking for a job or taking responsibility. I was amazed to see that he didn't even try to find a way to pay for his education himself. He just quit. It was the beginning of a series of bad decisions on his part. I started growing resentful. I had given him everything, an education, a home, and all the opportunities in the world, and he had thrown it all away over some misguided sense of pride. After weeks of watching him do nothing, I finally confronted Kyra that Jill needed to be taught a lesson. He was never serious about his studies, hence cutting off tuition didn't bother him much. The next day we sat him down and said, "If you're not going to school, you need to get a job. You can't just sit around all day expecting us to support you." Jill was on his phone. Without even looking at me, he said, "I'm working on it." I shot back, "No, you're not. You're sitting here waiting for me to give you more money. It's not happening." He rolled his eyes. "Fine, I'll start my own business. I just need a loan." I stared at him, incredulous. "You want me to give you money to start a business after everything you've done?" He looked me straight in the eye with a defiant expression. "Yeah, why not?" I had tried reasoning with him, tried helping him, but he had no respect for me or anyone in this house. That was the final straw. It was time for an ultimatum. I told him, "You have 2 choices. Either start paying rent and utilities, or you move out." He screamed fine and walked out. We thought maybe he'll be searching for work, but he didn't. He spent his days as usual. I told him he had 1 month to find a job and pay his share. He behaved as if he had eternity to pick up his crap. A month passed, but nothing changed. I asked him if he got a job, and he just nodded. Nope. I had said, then pack and leave. He stared at me with disbelief, written all over his face. You're kicking me out? I replied, I'm giving you a choice. You're an adult now. If you're not going to contribute to this household, then you can't live here. He just exploded. You're not my dad. You don't get to tell me what to do. I stood my ground. I may not be your biological father, but I'm the one who's been supporting you. I'm done. Either you contribute or you leave. He stormed out of the room, slamming doors as he went. A few minutes later, he packed his bags and left. He didn't even say goodbye to Kyra. Kyra was heartbroken, of course. She cried for days, and I did my best to comfort her. But I also knew we had done the right thing. We couldn't keep enabling his bad behavior. He needed to learn responsibility. It was during one of these emotional conversations that Kyra said something that caught me off guard. She said, I wish I had left with him. I asked what did she mean, and she said, I know what he did was wrong, but he is still my son and still very young. How can I abandon him? I don't know how he's doing. He's not even answering my calls. I'm concerned about his safety. My heart sank. I hadn't expected her to say that. Of course, I understood. Jill was her child, but I had thought we were united in this decision to make him responsible. While I understand it's hard for her, but it's also kind of difficult for us to have him around. Am I an a-hole for punishing him? Update 2. Here's the next update. After the last talk, Kyra and I barely spoke for the next week. There was tension and silence in the house. Ellie tried to avoid it all, keeping to her room and schoolwork, but I knew she could feel the weight of it too. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know where Kyra stood. I asked her straight if she really wanted to leave me and go with Jill. She looked at me. Her eyes were red from crying. She said, I don't know. I love you, but Jill is my son. I can't just abandon him. I made my point. I'm not asking you to abandon him, but he needs to learn responsibility. If you keep bailing him out, he'll never grow up. Kyra was torn between her love for Jill and the reality of the situation. She said I was right, but it doesn't make it easier for her. Jill was her only son, and sometimes you forget right and wrong when children are involved. I kind of get what she was saying, but I'm helpless. Pleading to Jill to come back home was not something I'm going to do. Maybe if Jill came back and apologized for his behavior, we could have a workaround, but he's too proud to accept his mistakes. It's been a few months since then. After a lot of attempts, Jill finally responded to Kyra and told her he's couch surfing with his friend next town. Though he hasn't come to terms with his actions, I'm glad he's at least found a part-time job. Ellie has started to come out of her shell again. She seems more at peace with him gone. She no longer has to tiptoe around the house, wondering when he'll strike next. The other day, she said she wanted to rejoin her tennis school. As for Kyra and me, we're still working through this. I love her, and I hope that, in time, she'll understand that what I did was for Jill's own good. Stopping Jill's tuition was a bold move, and it's understandable that you felt it was necessary to hold him accountable for his actions. It's heartbreaking to see Kyra struggling with the fallout from his decision, especially given the bond she has with her son, but it was desperately needed. What's important is that your conversations show that you both care deeply for Jill and want to guide him toward maturity, even though it's hard when he seems unwilling to acknowledge the impact of his behavior. Here's to healing. What would you have done? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today in the rLounge. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Until next time.